Ave Imperator, I watched a man's body betray him. His name was Guardsman Valen. 3 days ago he was a healthy soldier. 2 days ago he developed a cough. Yesterday his skin started weeping fluids. This morning I watched him beg for death as his own intestines crawled out of his body like serpents, still connected, still functioning, while he remained conscious through it all. He is still alive, still screaming, still begging. And the worst part, he is smiling, because Nurgle's corruption does not just destroy your body, it destroys your ability to understand that you should want to die. This is what happens when the plague god claims you, and it is worse than any death. The witness to Rod. Ave Imperator. I am Medici Investigator Celeste Varn, assigned to the Ordo Sepulchrum, a secretive division of the Adeptus Administratum dedicated to documenting and studying diseases of both natural and warp-tainted origin. For 19 years, I have cataloged plagues, analyzed infection vectors, and witnessed suffering that would break most minds. But nothing prepared me for Nurgle's corruption. Natural disease kills, warp-taint mutates, but Nurgle's touch does something far worse. It transforms suffering into joy, death into life, and turns victims into willing participants in their own destruction. I was deployed to the agri-world of Thessia IV after reports of an unusual plague outbreak. The local authorities believed it was a natural pathogen, perhaps a mutation of harvest fever, a common agricultural disease. They requested medical assistance to contain the spread. What I found was not natural disease. It was damnation wearing the skin of illness. The shuttle landed at Settlement Secundus, a farming community of approximately 40,000 souls. As the ramp lowered, I immediately knew something was catastrophically wrong. The smell hit me first, not the clean scent of growing crops or even the expected odor of a settlement dealing with disease. This was rot. Organic decay on a massive scale. It was the smell of meat left in humid heat for weeks, of standing water thick with algae, of compost heaps that had fermented into toxic sludge. But underneath that obvious decay was something else, something sweet, almost pleasant, like flowers blooming in a grave. My escort, a squad of local enforcers, seemed unbothered by the stench. Their leader, Arbiter Cross, actually smiled as he breathed deeply. "Smells like home," he said, "smells like life." I should have turned back then, but duty demanded investigation. The settlement of the damned. Settlement Secundus appeared normal from a distance. Buildings stood intact. Fields surrounded the town, crops growing in neat rows. Smoke rose from chimneys. It looked alive. But as we entered the settlement proper, the wrongness became apparent. The crops in the fields were growing, yes, but wrong. Wheat stalks had developed tumorous growths that pulsed like hearts. Vegetable plants bore fruit that was simultaneously overripe and rotting, yet still somehow alive and expanding. One field of what should have been barley had transformed into a carpet of fungal growth that breathed in synchronized rhythm. And the people, Emperor preserve me, the people. They went about their daily activities with disturbing normalcy. A woman hung laundry on a line laundry that was more mold than fabric, dripping fluids onto ground already saturated with filth. A man repaired his roof, his hands leaving trails of pus on every surface he touched. Children played in the street, their laughter wet and phlegmy, their games involving passing around what I initially thought was a ball but realized was a pulsating organ of unknown origin. None of them seemed distressed. None appeared to notice that their bodies were actively decomposing while they lived. I approached the woman with the laundry. Up close, I could see that her skin had taken on a greenish hue. Boils covered her arms, some weeping clear fluid, others already burst and crusted with dried discharge. One of her eyes had clouded over completely, the iris barely visible through a film of yellow mucus. "Good morning," I said, trying to maintain professional composure. "I'm Medici Investigator Varn. I'm here to help with the illness affecting your settlement." She turned to me and smiled. It was a genuine smile, full of warmth and happiness. Several of her teeth fell out as her mouth opened, landing in the mud at her feet with soft plops. "Illness?" she said, her voice bubbling with fluid in her lungs. "Oh, there's no illness here, love. We've been blessed. Can't you feel it, the gifts he's given us?" She held out her arms, showing me the boils as if they were jewelry. "Look how abundant we've become. Look at all the life growing on us. We're more alive than we've ever been." I asked what she meant by blessed and gifts. Who had given them these gifts? Her smile widened, more teeth falling. "The generous one, the grandfather. He came to us 3 weeks ago in the form of a traveling merchant. The merchant shared his wares, such wonderful wares, and taught us that decay is not death. It's transformation, it's evolution, it's love." The first infection. I documented 17 initial cases that first day. Each displayed similar symptoms, but the progression varied in disturbing ways. Case 1. Farmer Hebron, age 43. Initial symptoms appeared 7 days prior. Began with mild cough and fever. Within 24 hours, skin lesions developed across torso and extremities. Current state: entire abdominal cavity appears to have liquefied, yet subject remains ambulatory and functional. Reports no pain, describes sensation as warmth and fullness. Subject appears euphoric despite catastrophic internal damage. Case 2. Child Myra, age 9. Initial symptoms appeared 10 days prior. Began with stomach pain and nausea. Current state: subject's body is host to what appears to be a separate ecosystem. Fungal growths have replaced approximately 40% of skin. These growths pulse with independent movement. Subject describes them as friends and has named several of them. Shows no distress. Continues attempting to attend school. Case 3. Arbiter Cross, age 51, my escort. Initial symptoms appeared unknown duration prior. Subject cannot recall when changes began. Current state: subject's left arm has transformed into something no longer entirely human. Bones visible through skin that has become translucent and gelatinous. Muscles have developed additional striations that move independently of conscious control. Subject insists arm works better than before and demonstrates enhanced strength despite obvious structural damage. The pattern was clear. Nurgle's corruption did not simply kill, it transformed. It integrated decay into life, making the victims dependent on their corruption, making them grateful for their damnation. The moment of understanding. On the second day, I attempted to collect tissue samples from Farmer Hebron for laboratory analysis. What happened next revealed the true horror of Nurgle's touch. I made a small incision on his forearm, standard procedure for biopsy. The blade cut easily through skin that had the consistency of overripe fruit. What emerged was not blood. It was a mixture of fluids, pus, plasma, something green and viscous, and dozens of tiny creatures. Not microorganisms. I could see these with my naked eye. They were minute demons, each smaller than a grain of rice, swimming in the fluids that poured from the wound. And they were laughing. I could hear them, high-pitched giggles that made my brain itch. Hebron looked down at the wound with paternal affection. "Oh, there go some of the little ones. Don't worry, loves, you'll find new homes." He wiped his finger through the fluid, collecting several of the tiny demons, and offered them to me. "Would you like some? Grandfather is generous. He shares his gifts with everyone who accepts them." I recoiled in horror. Hebron seemed confused by my reaction. "Why do you pull away? They only want to love you, to help you become more than you are, to show you that endings are just beginnings, that death is just another kind of life." This was when I truly understood. Nurgle's corruption was not a disease in any conventional sense. It was a philosophy, a theology, a complete reframing of existence that made victims perceive their destruction as gift, their suffering as blessing, their damnation as salvation. Fighting it required fighting not just biological infection, but metaphysical corruption that rewrote a person's understanding of reality itself. The children, innocents corrupted. The most disturbing cases were the children. Approximately 700 children under the age of 15 lived in settlement secundus. All showed signs of infection, but their corruption manifested differently, more playful, more innocent, somehow more obscene because of that innocence. I observed a group of children playing in what they called grandfather's garden, a section of the settlement square that had transformed into a nightmare ecosystem. Vines grew that were more flesh than plant, pulsing with something like heartbeats. Flowers bloomed that released spores visible to the naked eye. Pools of standing water teemed with life forms that defied biological classification. The children played there happily. They made crowns from the fleshy vines. They collected the spores in jars like catching fireflies. They waded in the pools, letting the unknown organisms crawl over their skin. One girl, perhaps 6 years old, approached me with something cupped in her hands. "Miss Mediki, look what I grew." She opened her hands to reveal a perfect rose, except it was growing directly from her palm, its stem disappearing into a hole in her flesh that showed no sign of bleeding or infection. "It doesn't hurt," she assured me, sensing my horror. "It tickles sometimes, and it smells so pretty. Grandfather helped me grow it. He helps all of us grow special things." Another child, a boy of 8, had developed what he called helpful friends, a colony of Nurglings that had taken up residence in a cavity in his chest where his sternum should have been. I could see them through his semi-transparent skin, tiny demon creatures playing and napping in the hollow of his body. "They keep me company," he explained, "and they help me when I'm scared. They tell me jokes. Sometimes they come out to play, but they always come back home." As I watched, one of the Nurglings did emerge, crawling out through a gap between the boy's ribs, waving at me with a cheerful giggle, then crawling back inside to rejoin its companions. The boy patted his chest affectionately. "See, they're good friends." The spreading corruption. By the third day, I realized the infection was accelerating. People who had shown no symptoms when I arrived were now displaying advanced corruption. The disease, if it could even be called that, spread through mechanisms I could barely comprehend. It wasn't airborne in any conventional sense. Analysis of atmospheric samples showed normal composition. It wasn't waterborne. The settlement's water supply was contaminated, yes, but drinking purified water didn't prevent infection. The primary vector was conceptual. It spread through acceptance, through understanding, through that first moment when someone looked at the corruption and thought, perhaps this isn't so bad, perhaps this is actually a gift. I witnessed this happen to one of the enforcers in my escort. Corporal Venn had been professional, disciplined, showing no signs of infection for 2 full days. Then, on the morning of day 3, I found him in the settlement square, staring at the transformed fountain. The fountain had once been a standard imperial monument, an aquila pouring clean water. Now it had become a grotesque parody. The aquila's feathers had transformed into fleshy appendages. The water it poured was thick, greenish, teeming with visible organisms. "It's beautiful," Venn whispered. "I never noticed before, but it's actually beautiful. All this life, all this abundance. We spend so much time fighting against nature, against decay, against the natural order. But look at this. This is what happens when you stop fighting, when you accept." I tried to pull him away, but he resisted. "No, Mediki, I understand now. The people here aren't sick. They're blessed. They've found peace with the cycle. Birth, growth, decay, death, rebirth. It's all connected. It's all sacred." By that afternoon, Venn had developed his first boil. By evening, he was smiling through teeth that had started to loosen. By the next morning, he had fully joined the settlement, indistinguishable from those who had been infected from the start. He had not been bitten, had not consumed contaminated food or water, had not been touched by any obviously infectious material. He had simply accepted. And in accepting, he had opened himself to corruption that transcended biology. Fellow citizens, I must now describe in detail what happens to a human body when Nurgle claims it. What I document here is based on extensive observation, medical analysis, and testimony from those who retained enough awareness to describe their experiences. Nurgle's corruption progresses through identifiable stages, though the timeline and specific manifestations vary by individual. What remains constant is the inverse relationship between physical degradation and mental acceptance. As the body rots, the mind finds peace with that rot. Stage 1. The first touch, days 1-3. Initial infection presents as mundane illness. Mild fever, cough, fatigue, minor skin irritation. Victims typically dismiss these symptoms as seasonal illness or exposure to common pathogens. But careful observation reveals anomalies. The fever fluctuates in rhythmic patterns that match no known disease. The cough produces phlegm that contains microscopic organisms unknown to imperial biology. The skin irritation, when examined closely, shows patterns too geometric to be natural. Psychologically, victims begin experiencing unusual contentment, a sense that perhaps their health concerns aren't serious, a feeling that they should simply rest and let nature take its course. The beginning of acceptance. I documented this stage in Guardsman Valen, the man I mentioned at the beginning. Day 1, complained of sore throat and mild cough, dismissed it as exposure to settlement atmosphere. Day 2, cough worsened, developed low fever, requested sick leave but insisted he felt strangely peaceful despite symptoms. Day 3, skin lesions began appearing, yet Valen described feeling the most relaxed I've been in years. Stage 2, the blossoming, days 4-7. This stage marks the transition from mundane disease to obvious corruption. Symptoms accelerate dramatically. Skin lesions expand and multiply, forming patterns that repeat across the body. Internal organs begin showing signs of transformation, rather than simple disease. Bodily fluids change composition and color. New growths emerge, tumors, cysts, fungal colonies. Sensory perception begins altering, colors appear more vibrant, smells become strangely pleasant. I documented stage 2 extensively in a woman named Sarah. On day 4, small boils appeared across her arms and neck. On day 5, these boils had tripled in size and begun weeping fluid that hardened into crystalline formations. On day 6, her skin took on a greenish hue and developed a texture like leather that had been left in water. On day 7, flowering growths emerged from her shoulder blades, actual flowers, beautiful in a horrible way, their petals made of transformed flesh. Throughout this progression, Sarah's mood improved dramatically. She described feeling unburdened, connected to something larger and more alive than ever before. When I pointed out that her body was clearly deteriorating, she smiled and said, "That's just your perspective, Medikey. From where I'm standing, I'm becoming more complex, more interesting, more real." Stage 3, the integration, days 8-21. During this stage, the line between disease and identity blurs. The corruption is no longer something happening to the victim, it has become part of who they are. Physical changes accelerate beyond recognition. Organ systems begin operating in ways that defy medical understanding. Bones soften and reshape, sometimes growing additional structures. Musculature develops independent movement patterns. Sensory organs may duplicate or transform entirely. The body becomes host to ecosystem of smaller organisms living in symbiosis. But most disturbing is the psychological shift. Victims stop fighting the corruption not because they've given up, but because they genuinely no longer perceive it as corruption. They see it as evolution, improvement, gift. Farmer Hebron, whom I mentioned earlier, exemplified stage 3. By day 14, his internal organs had relocated within his body cavity, arranging themselves in patterns that made no anatomical sense, yet somehow functioned. His digestive system had developed additional chambers that processed food in ways I could not comprehend. His skin had become semi-permeable, allowing exchange of materials between his body and the environment. When I asked if he felt pain, he looked confused by the question. Pain? No, Mediki, I feel full, complete, like I was living my whole life at half capacity and now I'm finally operating at full potential. He demonstrated by lifting a piece of farm equipment that should have required 3 men. His transformed musculature, no longer constrained by normal human limits, provided strength far beyond what his frame suggested. See, he said proudly, grandfather's gifts make us stronger, better, more than we were. Stage 4, the apotheosis, days 22 plus. In the final stage, victims cease to be recognizably human. They have become something else, part human, part demon, part living ecosystem, fully integrated into Nurgle's garden of decay. Physical transformation reaches its extreme. Bodies may expand to several times normal size, or fragment into multiple semi-independent components. Consciousness may distribute across the body, rather than centering in the brain. The boundary between self and environment disappears. Victims merge partially with their surroundings. Some develop the ability to generate new life, spawning Nurglings or other demon creatures. Death becomes impossible in any conventional sense. The body continues functioning regardless of damage. I witnessed full Stage 4 transformation in the settlement's leader, Mayor Terrence. By day 30, he had ceased moving from his office in the town hall, not because he couldn't move, because he had merged with the building itself. His body had expanded to fill the entire mayoral office, flesh flowing into and through the stone walls. Organs that should have been internal were now external, visible through his translucent skin, some extending beyond his body proper to integrate with the building's structure. His consciousness seemed distributed. I could speak to him by addressing any part of the biomass, and he would respond from whichever portion was closest. Mediki Varn, he said, his voice coming from a mouth that had formed in what used to be the desk. You continue your observations, but do you yet understand? I am not dying. I am becoming eternal. This building will stand for centuries, and I will stand with it, part of it, protecting my people as I always have. Grandfather has granted me immortality. How can that be corruption? The gift that keeps giving. But perhaps most disturbing was discovering what happened to those who tried to resist Nurgle's touch once infected. I found 3 individuals in Settlement Secundus who were still fighting, who had not accepted, who looked upon their transforming bodies with horror and continued to see corruption for what it was. Their suffering was indescribable. The first was an off-world merchant named Callas who had been visiting when the outbreak began. He was a devout follower of the imperial cult, his faith strong enough to resist the psychological corruption even as his body succumbed to the physical. When I found him, he was restrained in what used to be the settlement's shrine, now a twisted mockery of imperial architecture, every aquila transformed into something writhing and diseased. He had bound himself there voluntarily, chains wrapped around corrupted flesh to prevent himself from wandering into town and spreading this curse, as he called it. His body had progressed to late Stage 3. His skin wept constantly. Boils covered him in layers. Small demon creatures crawled in and out of wounds that would not close. Fungal growth had replaced most of his hair and was beginning to extend down his neck and back. But unlike every other victim I'd observed, Callas was in agony, true, screaming agony, because he still perceived the transformation as horror. His faith prevented the psychological corruption that made others accept their fate, which meant he experienced every moment of physical degradation with full awareness and revulsion. "Kill me," he begged when he saw me. "Please, Mediki, I'm a loyal servant of the Emperor. Grant me the mercy of death before I become one of them, before I lose myself completely." I examined him thoroughly. Despite his suffering, his vital signs were stable, more than stable. The corruption had made him robust, resilient. His body would continue functioning regardless of how much he wanted it to stop. I had no means to grant his request. The corruption had progressed too far. Even a headshot wouldn't kill him now. His consciousness had begun distributing beyond his brain. Burning wouldn't work. I'd witnessed infected victims walk through fire, their bodies continuing to function even as they burned. Poison was useless. Their transformed biology processed toxins as nutrition. He was trapped, locked in a body that was betraying him, unable to die, unable to accept, forced to watch himself transform into something he found abominable. "Why?" he screamed. "Why does he do this? Why make us suffer and then tell us it's love? Why transform us against our will and call it gift? What kind of God?" He couldn't finish. His throat had begun transforming, making speech difficult. But I saw the question in his eyes. What kind of God tortures those who refuse his gifts? The answer, I realized with horror, was simple. A God who cannot comprehend that his gifts might be unwanted. To Nurgle, all life is sacred. All transformation is growth. All decay is simply another form of existence. The concept that someone might prefer death to corruption is incomprehensible to him. So he gives his gifts regardless, and those who cannot accept suffer eternally. The plague, Marines, the end state. On day 23, they arrived. Death Guard Plague Marines, Space Marines who had fallen to Nurgle millennia ago during the Horus Heresy. They came to Settlement Secundus to tend Grandfather's garden, as they put it. I hid, observing from a ruined building, recording everything despite knowing I should flee. There were 7 of them. Each stood perhaps 8 feet tall in power armor that was more rust and corrosion than metal. Their ceramite was stained green and brown, weeping fluids, covered in growths. Some had additional limbs sprouting from their backs. Others had developed horns or other protrusions from their helmets. But what made them truly terrifying was not their appearance, it was their demeanor. They moved through the corrupted settlement with casual affection, greeting the infected citizens like a beloved grandfather greeting his grandchildren. One of the Plague Marines knelt before a group of children, the ones I had seen playing in Grandfather's garden. He removed his helmet, revealing a face that was barely human anymore. His skin was bloated and green. His eyes had multiplied, 7 orbs arranged in a circle where 2 should have been. His mouth, when he smiled, showed teeth that had fused into a solid mass of bone. "Little ones," he said, his voice a wet gurgle, "how beautifully you've grown. Grandfather is pleased with your garden. You've made such wonderful things here." The children swarmed him, climbing on his corrupted armor, showing him their own transformations with pride. He praised each one, his enthusiasm genuine, his affection real. And that was perhaps most disturbing. These were not monsters pretending to care. They genuinely loved these children, genuinely believed they were helping them, genuinely saw their corruption as improvement. One of the Plague Marines approached Farmer Hebron. They embraced like old friends, though they had never met. "Brother," the Plague Marine said, "you've accepted Grandfather's gifts with grace. Your faith is beautiful. Would you join us? Would you help spread his blessings to other worlds that have not yet received them?" Hebron was honored, thrilled. He agreed immediately. The Plague Marine drew a knife, a corroded blade covered in substances I didn't want to identify. He cut Hebron's palm, then his own. They pressed the wounds together, allowing their corrupted blood to mingle. I watched through my vidrecorder as something transferred between them, not just biological material but something deeper. Essence, purpose, connection to Nurgle that transcended mere infection and became covenant. When they separated, Hebron was changed. Still himself, but more. Connected to the Death Guard, to Nurgle's grand design, to 10,000 years of spreading rot across the galaxy. "Thank you, brother," Hebron whispered. "I understand now. This isn't the end. It's just the beginning. There are so many who still suffer in ignorance, who haven't yet received grandfather's love. We must share it. We must help them. This is the final stage. Not transformation of body, but transformation of purpose. Victims don't just accept their corruption. They become evangelists for it, actively seeking to spread it, genuinely believing they are helping others by condemning them to the same fate. Fellow servants of the Emperor, I must now confess my failure. Despite all precautions, despite my training, despite my faith, I too became infected. It began on day 19 of my investigation. A small cut on my hand. I had been careless while collecting samples, allowed contaminated material to contact a minor wound. I immediately applied counterseptic, sterilized the area, administered broad-spectrum antibiotics. It wasn't enough. It is never enough with Nurgle's corruption. Day 20, mild fever. I dismissed it as stress and exhaustion. I had been working 18-hour days, sleeping poorly, eating inadequately. Of course, I felt unwell. Day 21. The cut on my hand refused to heal. It wept clear fluid that had a faintly sweet smell. I applied more counterseptic, bandaged it carefully, told myself it was simple infection. Day 22, I developed a cough, dry at first, then wet. The phlegm I produced was slightly greenish. I recognized the color. I had seen it in hundreds of infected victims, and I knew what it meant. I was infected, Nurgle had touched me, and the clock was ticking. I made a decision then that has haunted me since. I chose to continue my documentation rather than immediately seeking medical evacuation. I told myself it was for the good of the Imperium, that my observations of corruption from the inside would provide invaluable data for fighting future outbreaks. But the truth was simpler and more shameful. I wanted to know. I wanted to understand what it felt like. And some part of me, a part I still cannot fully acknowledge, was curious about whether I might come to accept it as the others had. The internal war. Days 23 through 30 were hell. True, absolute hell. Because I fought with every technique I knew, medical, psychological, spiritual, to resist the corruption's advance. Physically, the disease progressed predictably. My symptoms matched those I had documented in others. Day 23. Fever intensified. Cut on hand developed raised edges, began to harden into scale-like formations. First boils appeared on my arms. Day 24. Boils multiplied. Skin took on slight greenish tint. Sensory perception began shifting. Colors appeared more saturated, sounds more distinct. Day 25. Internal sensations changed. I could feel organs I shouldn't have been able to feel, liver, pancreas, intestines, as if they were becoming more present, more real within my body. Day 26. Discovered small growths emerging from my scalp. Examined them with horror and found them to be fungal colonies, fed by my own biology, yet somehow separate from me. Day 27. Digestive system began operating differently. Food tasted strange, not bad, but alien. My body was processing nutrients in ways it hadn't before. But the physical progression was manageable compared to the psychological assault. Because from day 23 onward I began hearing the voice, not externally, internally. A presence in my mind that spoke with affection, with understanding, with promise of peace. "Child," it whispered, "why do you struggle? Why do you perceive growth as corruption, transformation as loss? You are becoming more than you were. Embrace it, accept it, let go of your pain." I recognized the voice. Every infected victim I had interviewed had described it. Grandfather Nurgle himself, speaking directly to his potential children, offering them the peace of acceptance. I resisted. I prayed to the Emperor for strength. I recited catechisms. I focused on my training, my duty, my loyalty. I told myself that pain was temporary but service was eternal. But the voice persisted, patient, kind, never angry at my resistance, never threatening, simply, There, always offering, always waiting. And Emperor, forgive me, there were moments when I wanted to accept. When the constant pain, the endless struggle, the exhausting effort of resistance seemed like unnecessary suffering. When the voice's promises of peace sounded so reasonable, so kind, so loving. Day 28 was my lowest point. The physical corruption had progressed to late stage 2. My body was clearly transforming. Boils covered my arms and torso. My skin had taken on a definitively greenish hue. The cut on my hand had become a flowering growth, literally blooming from my flesh. And I was so tired, so endlessly, crushingly tired of fighting. I stood in front of a mirror in my quarantine chamber looking at what I was becoming, and for just a moment, just one horrible, shameful moment, I thought, maybe this isn't so bad. Maybe I could accept this. Maybe the voice is right. That moment of weakness terrified me more than any physical transformation could, because I realized then what made Nurgle's corruption so effective. It was seductive not through lies but through offering rest. It promised an end to struggle, an acceptance of natural cycles, peace with mortality. And for humans living in the constant war that is the 41st millennium, for souls who have never known true peace, for minds exhausted by eternal vigilance, that promise is almost irresistible. The cure that costs everything. I did not accept. Through faith, through stubbornness, through sheer spite at the idea of surrendering, I maintained my resistance through day 30. On day 31, the orbital frigate Purity's light arrived in response to my distress beacon. They brought with them something I had not dared hope for, an inquisitor of the Ordo Malleus, specializing in demonic corruption. Inquisitor Vakarian examined me for approximately 7 seconds before declaring, "This one can be saved, barely, but the process will be unpleasant." Unpleasant. That word does not begin to describe what followed. The purification ritual took 17 hours. I was restrained in a blessed circle, while Vakarian and his retinue subjected my body to every cleansing technique known to the Imperium. Blessed unguents burned into my skin, scorching away corrupted flesh. Sanctified blades cutting infected tissue from my body without anesthetic. Pain helps focus the will, Vakarian explained. Holy water that felt like acid on corrupted areas. Psychic assault on the presence in my mind, burning out Nurgle's whispers. Prayers and exorcisms chanted for hours until my ears bled. And through it all, I had to remain conscious, had to actively participate in my own purification, had to fight alongside the Inquisitor against the corruption that had wormed into my very soul. I screamed. Emperor knows I screamed. I begged them to stop, to just let me die, anything to end the agony. The pain of purification was worse than anything the corruption had done to me. But they didn't stop, couldn't stop, because stopping meant damnation. When it ended, when Vakarian finally declared me clean, I had lost my right hand amputated at the wrist, the corruption too deep to save. 3 fingers from my left hand, approximately 40% of my skin, replaced with augmetic grafts, and my ability to ever feel truly clean again. But I was alive, and I was free from Nurgle's touch. The fate of settlement, SECUNDUS. The Purity's light brought more than an inquisitor. It brought exterminatus. On day 32, after extracting me and confirming that no other survivors remained uncorrupted, Inquisitor Vakarian authorized atmospheric incendiary purge of Thessia IV. I watched from orbit as Settlement Secundus and 17 other infected locations across the planet burned. The firestorm consumed everything, the corrupted crops, the transformed buildings, the infected citizens who had become Nurgle's children. They didn't understand why the sky was raining fire. The radio transmissions we intercepted in those final moments showed their confusion. Why are they attacking? We're not hostile, we just want to share grandfather's gifts. Please tell them we mean no harm. We're more alive now than before. We're better. The children. Why are they burning the children? We were going to help them grow even more beautiful. They died without understanding that from the Imperium's perspective, they were already dead. That the moment they accepted Nurgle's touch, they ceased being human and became weapons of chaos that had to be destroyed. 17 million souls burned that day. Men, women, children, all reduced to ash because they had been touched by Grandfather Nurgle. Most died happy, smiling, unable to comprehend why they were being punished for accepting what they perceived as gifts. An Inquisitor Vacarian felt nothing as he watched. His face remained impassive as he said, "Pity is a luxury we cannot afford." They were lost the moment they accepted. Better a clean death by fire than eternal corruption spreading across the Imperium. He was right, of course. From a strategic perspective, from a coldly logical analysis of threat containment, exterminatus was the only solution. But I still hear their voices sometimes. The children asking why we were hurting them. The parents trying to protect offspring who were already damned. The infected citizens who genuinely believed they were being improved and couldn't understand why that improvement was answered with apocalyptic fire. The legacy of investigation. I survived Thessia IV. I survived the purification. I survived the psychological trauma of witnessing 17 million deaths I helped authorize. But I did not survive unchanged. My report to the Adeptus Administratum was 4,000 pages of detailed documentation about Nurgle's corruption, infection vectors, progression timelines, psychological manipulation techniques, case studies, and recommendations for early detection and containment. The Administratum read it, classified it, and then ordered me never to speak of Thessia IV again. The official records state that the planet suffered catastrophic agricultural plague, requiring sterilization. No mention of chaos. No mention of Nurgle. No mention that 17 million people died because they couldn't resist the offer of peace in a galaxy that offers none. But I made copies, hidden copies, encoded copies, stored across the Imperium in archives that might survive my death. Because those 17 million deserve to have their truth known, even if that truth is terrible. They were corrupted not because they were evil, but because they were tired. Tired of struggling, tired of suffering, tired of the endless grind of imperial life. And when something offered them rest, offered them acceptance of mortality, offered them peace with decay, they took it. Nurgle's greatest weapon is not disease. It is the promise that suffering can end. And in a galaxy where suffering is the only constant, that promise is nearly impossible to resist. Fellow citizens, I have shown you the fate of those corrupted by Nurgle. Not the propaganda version, not the simple narrative of evil choosing damnation, but the reality. Normal people, worn down by lives of hardship, seduced by promises of peace and rest, transformed into something that believes it has been improved while being destroyed. This is what makes Nurgle the most insidious of the Chaos Gods. Khorne offers power through rage, easy to recognize and resist. Tzeentch offers knowledge through schemes, detectable by the ambitious patterns. Slaanesh offers pleasure through excess, obvious in its depravity. But Nurgle offers something far more seductive. He offers an end to pain. He promises that you can stop fighting, stop struggling, stop carrying the burden of existence. He tells you that decay is natural, that death is just another form of life, that acceptance is wisdom rather than weakness. And for humans living in the Imperium, where life is brutal, where hope is scarce, where suffering is endemic, that promise is almost irresistible. I lost my right hand to Nurgle's touch, but I gained understanding of how corruption works. And that understanding is this: you cannot fight Nurgle with hate. Hate acknowledges the enemy. Hate gives them power. You fight Nurgle with refusal, with stubborn, spiteful, unreasonable refusal to accept that suffering must be permanent, with hope, however fragile, with faith, however tested, with the conviction that there are things worth fighting for even when fighting is exhausting. To anyone who reads this testimony, if you ever encounter Nurgle's corruption, know that the voice will come. It will offer you rest. It will promise peace. It will tell you that acceptance is wisdom and resistance is futile. Do not listen, fight, even when fighting seems pointless, even when rest seems so appealing, even when every fiber of your being wants to just stop. Because the peace Nurgle offers is not peace. It is the end of choice disguised as acceptance. It is damnation wearing the mask of enlightenment. It is eternal suffering that you've been psychologically manipulated into perceiving as joy. I am Medikey investigator Celeste Varn, and I have documented the truth about Nurgle's corruption. This testimony exists in hidden archives across the Imperium, preserved so that future generations might understand what they face. Ave Imperator, Gloria in excelsis terra. May the Emperor grant strength to resist what offers rest, courage to fight what offers peace, and understanding that true acceptance comes through victory, not surrender. The Plague God offers gifts, refuse them all. Because some gifts are poison, some love is destruction, and some gods only want to help you die smiling. Classified medical documentation, Nurgle corruption analysis. Medikey investigator Celeste Varn, Ordo Sepulchrum. Records sealed and hidden, 943 M41. They died happy, believing they were blessed. That makes it worse, not better. Remember them. Remember what seduction looks like when it wears the face of kindness.